Street Fighter 2 almost released with a very embarrassing typo on its title screen, misspelling the subtitle of the game. And the story for how they managed to fix this with just 3 days to go before release is a hack like I've never seen before. In this interview from 1991, Akira Nishishanti, the creative director of Street Fighter 2, talks about the process of finding this bug. And what you'll find interesting is this endless repetition of fine-tuning, bug check, ROM update, print new ROM, find new bugs. And this highlights how different development was at this period of time compared to how it is today. So when they noticed the subtle mistake of Warrior being misspelt with an E, it wasn't as simple as just changing the text on the title screen. Street Fighter 2 was an arcade game, which meant that it sort of shipped with its own computer built in. It's completely different to how computer games work today or any sort of software. And let me talk you through that process so you understand exactly why this bug was so difficult to resolve. Inside the machine of the arcade game, there's all sorts of the physical components for collecting coins and stuff. At the belly of these machines usually hid an abomination of tangled wires covered in jammer harness where the motherboard would be inserted as a slot in. So the wooden and non-game related components are kind of fixed, and then the PCB, the printed circuit board for the game, would be inserted into the harness that would specialize the machine to play Street Fighter 2. So within one of these PCBs there's actually 3 layers to it, and the layer that's of interest to us is board B, which is where the specialized game code would sit. So this is what one of those boards looks like. It's a standardized format with 38 slots for things called ROM, read-only memory. So read-only memory looks like this. You might remember CD-ROMs, which were kind of the more consumer-oriented version of these things. So these were compact disc hyphen read-only memory. And you might remember that if you ever wanted to burn data onto these things, like a film or some photos or something, you could only do it once, and then you didn't get the opportunity to overwrite that. To overwrite them, you needed one of these CD-RWs, but they were a lot harder to find. So you can see this is board B filled with Street Fighter 2 ROMs. And there are 2 sections of ROMs. You've got the GFX ROMs, the graphics ROMs, and the 68,000 ROMs, which are the code. And the way that production worked at Capcom at the time, these 2 ROMs were burnt at different times. So they'd burn the graphics ROMs much earlier than the code ROMs, on the understanding that the graphics were unlikely to change, whereas the code could change up until the last minute. So at the time that they discovered this bug, all of the graphics ROMs had already been burnt. And like CD-ROMs, you couldn't change them after they're burnt. At the time, there was also a global shortage of ROMs, and they were really expensive. So it was completely impractical to try and change the data on these graphics ROMs. What was on these graphics ROMs? Well, essentially sprite sheets for all of the characters and graphics that you'd see in the game. So here you can see some early sketches from the artists about how they were going to structure the ROMs, and these would eventually be polished up into pixel art that were finally printed onto the ROMs. You can see some interesting things here, like they're being very careful with their use of space. This character's leg is only present once because to render the other leg, they duplicate it. So that demonstrates how valuable the space was on these ROMs. Anyway, when it came to the title screen, the ROM that contained the World Warrior text had already been printed, and it contained this typo. And with only 3 days to go before the code ROMs had to be finalized, this had to be fixed. And the only way that they could do this is by changing the code, not by changing the images. The way that they solved this problem was to notice that the WOR of world kind of looks like an IOR of warrior. So instead of rendering the original tiles designed for IER, they actually just render the world tiles twice. But you'll notice that the I still doesn't look right. It's missing its sort of dot on the top. And the solution to that is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. It turns out that this character, Guile, has one very special tile right here, 9006, that contains only a single pixel. And here it is zoomed in. This tile here contains only a single pixel. It is green, but that turns out not to be a problem because the way that the palettes work is that the palettes for the sprites are stored on the code ROMs, whereas just the patterns are stored on the graphics ROMs. So it's possible to change the palette that you render this image with to use a different palette. So in order to finally fix the eye of Warrior, they render that character's leftmost pixel of their calf 3 times just where the eye should be. So if ever you've wondered why the eye in Warrior is a little thin and has this curvy bit, this is why. This isn't the only interesting story about Street Fighter 2's development and the tile sets that they used. I have to thank Fabian Sanglar for creating some of these resources and investigating the hardware in particular. I'll link to his website down below and also his book, The Book of CP System, where some of these images were sourced from.